The Samsung Z Fold3 is the best folding phone out there, at least that's what people are saying. But I'm here to tell you that not only is the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold2 just as good, but also that this is a phone that you should actually consider. Let's talk about why the Z Fold2 is worth buying in 2022. Hello everyone, this is Matt from Real World Review, socials will listed above, and yes, I think the Z Fold2 is better than the 3. Now let's get this out of the way. Now clearly the Z Fold 2 isn't actually better than the Z Fold 3, given that you miss out on the S Pen, water resistance, and a faster front screen. But for me, that doesn't really warrant the $200 or more price difference. I mean, for $700 you can get a Z Fold 2 or buy a Samsung S21 FE. This phone is literally in budget flagship price points now. It also turns 2 years old later this year, but it's still an outstanding device. Recently, this phone was given Android 12, along with some security patches after that. And while the update seems minor, it is still very stable on here, beating out even Google Pixel phones in reliability. The phone is still treated like the premium phone that it is, though the beginning was kind of rough. Remember that this phone was $2,000 at launch. But again, this phone is more than just a phone. We start with a fair phone experience. The screen is a very narrow 6.2-inch OLED display that has a resolution similar to a 1080p display, giving me a cramped feel, but good enough to still allow me to get decent things done from this panel. Then we open up the phone, which is already more than what you can do with most phones, and this exposes the large 7.6-inch flexible OLED display. This display runs at 120 Hz, unlike the 60 Hz outer display, and is almost a square, which I'm not entirely a fan of. Still, it's a nice canvas to watch videos and scroll through. Similar to my review that I did last year, I still feel the same way. The screen experience is absolutely amazing, but it is lacking. This could be due to no one really competing to make this better. Sure, Oppo is trying, and a lot of people seem to be preferring that form factor, but even now, at least in the United States, we still haven't received a reasonable competitor other than from Samsung themselves. The special part about this phone is that it fixes the issues that the first one had, is proven to work and reliable, and is closer to the first Fold's price in the used market, rather than the third. So we touched on the screen, literally, but let me tell you about the rest of the phone. So the screens are good, featuring 373 pixels per inch on the inside, while the outside is 386. Resolution-wise, think 1080p displays, but the inner display is nice and bright with HDR support. The inner screen is an adaptive 120Hz display, while the outer is the fixed 60Hz display. Even with the lower pixel density, video pops more on the internal display, making it feel more appropriate to use this for video consumption in games, while the outer feels more for text and other social media. Wait, I said I was going to move on from the screens. To power all of this, we are given a Snapdragon 865 Plus chip with 12GB of RAM, now with 4GB of virtual RAM, which I don't really know what that means. We're also given 256GB of UFS 3.1 storage, which is all powered by the dual-cell 4500mAh battery. Now, some may say that the processor is old, but when I compared this to the Z Fold 3, I found really no performance difference or even battery life difference, with any of the glitches being Android 12 related. Sure, it isn't the latest and some games might run faster, but it feels closer to S21 Ultra power than the S10 5G. And that's another reason why I can't warrant the price difference from the Z Fold 3. We still get 25-watt charging, wireless charging, and reverse wireless charging, as well as a solid 1-day battery life. It's technically heavier than the Z Fold 3, but that's on paper. I don't really notice too much of the weight difference, just like how I didn't notice the Z Fold 2 being bigger than the Z Fold 3 in every axis, making the 2 bigger and heavier than the 3. But that's pretty much it. We're given similar 5G capabilities as the 3, along with all the ports. The speakers are good, technically being smaller than the 3, but neither phones sound outstanding. The USB-C 3.1 port on the bottom gives you access to DeX, something that still feels weird because the Z Flip 3 doesn't support this. Similar to my Z Fold 3 video, the differences are so small that the 2 really does feel like a better option. Personally, I'm not a fan of the S Pen. The battery and the performance is supposed to be worse on the 2, but real-world usage proves that they're pretty much the same, just like the outer hardware. The back has shiny glass, which I covered with a skin, if you buy the black one like I did, while the bronze one is a matte finish. There is glass on the front as well, both being Gorilla Glass Victus, while the frame around is aluminum. The inside is a plastic display with a plastic trim. While it should be noted that the screen does have glass, it's featured inside this protective layer, so you can't touch the glass. And most likely any major damage done to the screen would happen in the crease area due to the glass possibly breaking. Fun, right? Personally, everything just works for me. I used the S21 Ultra and went back to this phone, and I didn't really notice too much of a difference, if any. But going from the Z Fold 3 to this made me realize even more how the performance difference translates to nothing, for me at least. Which I would call that a win for the Z Fold 2. So the cameras are good. I don't use them that much, but we can still talk about the 3 on the rear and the identical front cameras. We do get 3 12 megapixel sensors on the back, being an ultra wide, normal wide, and telephoto 2x sensor, while the front cameras are identical 10 megapixel sensors. All these sensors are good, producing some top of the line shots, but still lacking in some situations. It feels like the shutter isn't always the fastest, and the 12 megapixel zoom camera isn't enough when we see the same or larger megapixel count out of cameras that can zoom 3 times or even further, with awesome 10x shots out of any Samsung Ultra phones. And these are all phones that are cheaper than this one. Also, the ultra-wide sensor does not focus, which isn't a huge deal, but similar to the Fold 3, macro shots just don't look good. While it isn't the worst, the launch price at $2,000 kind of makes the cameras feel extremely underwhelming. But when you find this phone at $700 or less, the cameras feel more acceptable now. But the best part is that the rear cameras perform exactly the same as the Z Fold 3, at least in my tests. And when talking about the front cameras, they actually have one that's better. The front camera is the same as the other front camera, which is weird to say. The 10 megapixel camera is a fixed focus, which is kind of annoying, seeing that the S10e had a focusable 10 megapixel sensor, but at least the inside one isn't a 4 megapixel underscreen sensor. This produces some good shots and supports 4K 60 frames per second. The rear cameras also support 4K 60, but that's only limited to the main sensor, while 4K 30 works on all sensors. There's no 8K here, but Samsung only makes 8K 24 frames per second phones, even with the S22 Ultra, so we aren't really missing much yet. Overall, wonderful camera setup that is very overpriced, but now sits at a reasonable price. So if you're looking for a phone, no. You don't need a phone like this for normal usage, unless you want that dual screen experience. We aren't at the computer level, where you can take something like a MacBook Air, fold it closed to a small device, and then open it up to a super protective device. Okay, that's a horrible analogy, but even in this field, making a thin and usable laptop took years to complete. So this design that Samsung has is a very good start, but I don't really see this being a final idea. While the inside screen is 120Hz and very fluid, the outer screen is 60Hz, which isn't bad, but constantly switching, you'll notice a difference. But I am going back on what I say, because after using the Z Fold 3, that refresh rate doesn't really matter that much. Sure, it's nice to match, but the outer screen is not what you're using this phone for. Also, this phone does keep 60 frames per second most of the time, whereas old phones drop a lot, making the screen feel like 30 to 45 frames per second, even on basic apps. So, the screen does look smooth, but the main display is on the inside panel. The phone lacks water resistance, but it also has a plastic screen. You need to be careful with this phone, but also you spent so much money on this phone. Protect your investment. I don't think anyone needs folding phones just yet, but I clearly get the appeal of the phone because it's technically been my daily driver for over a year. I still own the Z Fold 3 with thoughts of selling it in the future, so that should tell you something. In this field, the latest and greatest is nice, but I feel like the Samsung Z Fold 2 fits in the sweet spot that everyone will love, except for S Pen lovers. I somewhat merged the last section with this section, but let me tell you about the things that I kind of missed. I got my phone at launch, and it still feels pretty much the same, but in a good way. The hinge does seem to have its weird days where it feels like it's loosening up, but then snaps back to normal later that day. I normally carry 2 phones with me, so having this feels cumbersome in my pocket, almost like carrying 3 phones. Remember that MacBook Air comparison? This phone is thicker than that. It is a single SIM and single storage, meaning that 256 or 512 gigabytes of storage is what you get, and that's it. Which technically isn't a foreign idea in the foldable space. The battery life still works pretty well, lasting me a full day easily, and I did manage to get very close to squeezing 2 days of reasonable usage out of it. Even though we get just 25 watts of charging, it still charges at a respectable speed. While the Z Fold 3 seems appealing to most, I feel like the Z Fold 2 is a choice that people should consider, seeing that the price difference doesn't really give you that much. Lastly, let me tell you about today's sponsor, me. I've never had any sponsors because no one's really ever offered to sponsor a video, but I'll tell you a few ways to help support the channel if you want to. There is an Amazon link in the description, just like there are in almost all my videos, and for every purchase I get a small commission. Now, I'm not sponsored by Amazon, obviously, so if you don't want to make purchases with them, that's fine. But if you do, even a single $3 purchase helps out the channel and allows me to continue spending $2,000 on a phone that's worth $700 now. But you can also help me for free, simply by watching my videos without an ad blocker on, or if you have YouTube Premium. Okay, let me try and get rid of my script voice. Regardless of how you support my channel, I'm always thankful for you and that I have an audience. It's actually kind of crazy. We're at 15,000 subscribers and 5 million views. This is all insane to me. So truly, thank you all. But that's the end of my review of the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 2, the best foldable that I continue to always use. But what do you think? Should you skip over this and go to the Z Fold 3, wait for the Z Fold 4, or save some money on the Z Fold 2? Let me know in the comment section below, and as always, thanks for watching.